Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to the banks of the Nile. The air is thick with dust and incense. The only sounds are distant chants, the low rumble of the river, and the occasional squawk of a heron that's clearly had too much to say. You're barefoot, wrapped in linen, and rubbing your eyes as you trudge down a packed earth road toward a courtyard filled with smoke, chatter, and the faint, dreamy scent of roasting grain. You've just been recruited, or perhaps voluntold, into the ancient world's most sacred carbohydrate operation, baking honey bread for the gods. And no, you probably wouldn't survive a day. It's hot, it's repetitive, there are no gloves, no mixers, and definitely no PTO. If your bread isn't fluffy enough, it's not just your job on the line, it's cosmic balance. No pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun isn't even up yet. The sky still dark purple, stretched flat above Thebes like an old linen shroud. You shuffle into the courtyard of the temple's bakery complex, stepping around sleeping goats, broken baskets, and a jug someone definitely meant to move yesterday. A few fires are already lit, and the brick ovens glow like sleepy animal eyes in the gloom. You can smell yesterday's ash and today's ambition mixing in the air. You don't clock in. Time's kept by the rising sun and the shadows of the pylons outside. You find your work spot, an area worn smooth by years of kneading, shaping, and muttered curses. The first task is always the fire. You help your neighbor stoke the clay ovens with bundles of papyrus stems and a few unlucky fig branches. The smoke curls low, creeping into your nose and hair until you start to smell like someone roasted a barley cake over your head. In the corner, an older baker, the kind who seems to remember the reign of Djoser personally, grunts something about the good old days when bakers got paid in more than leftover dates. You nod sympathetically and try not to breathe too deeply when he opens a jar of fermenting yeast. It smells like someone tried to pickle a shoe. Still, there's a rhythm to this life. The bricks are warm underfoot, your muscles remember the routine before your brain fully wakes up. Someone hands you a basket of emmer wheat flour, coarse, sandy, the kind that chews back when you eat it. You dump it into a wide clay bowl, then begin adding water ladled from a pot covered in lotus leaves to keep the bugs out. You mix slowly, the flour clinging to your fingers like damp earth. Outside the bakery walls, the temple is coming alive. You can hear distant chanting, the rhythmic clack of staffs on stone. Priests in white linen glide past the arched entry, occasionally scowling at you like you're too loud for their gods. Your work, though, is divine too. These loaves aren't just breakfast, they're offerings, gifts for gods with suspiciously human appetites. Ra likes his loaves golden. Hathor prefers honeyed twists. Osiris, he's a bit of a minimalist. You'll be baking a full menu before the second shadow marks the temple wall. One of the junior bakers is already complaining. He's tripped over a reed mat and claims he's broken his toe. Again. You wonder aloud if maybe he should offer that toe to Sekhmet and ask for sturdier feet. He doesn't laugh, probably still sore from last week's honey burn. As the ovens heat up, so does the tempo. You knead dough with your palms, your knuckles, even the heels of your hands when the mixture starts fighting back. A few stones from poorly sifted flour crunch under your fingers. Ancient Egyptian baking tip, always chew carefully or risk chipping a royal molar. And yet, despite the effort, there's peace in the repetition. The soft slap of dough on clay, the scent of emmer and ash, the comfort of knowing you're part of something older than any pyramid. You imagine the gods watching, not stern and thunderous, but maybe curious, maybe hungry. Above, the sky is changing. The sun is beginning to rise. No grand display, just a slow bleed of gold along the horizon. You squint as it peeks between temple walls and bathes the courtyard in dusty light. Shadows stretch long, and you step into your day fully now. Soot on your face, dough on your tunic, and heat already prickling your scalp. You glance over at the line of half-shaped loaves waiting their turn in the fire. Some are plain, meant for temple guards or scribes. Others are intricately molded, spirals, twisted ropes, or shaped like birds mid-flight. The dough is tacky, soft, and warm from your hands. There's no scale to measure with, no precise gram count to log. Just the familiar weight of the mixture between your palms, judged with the kind of precision that only comes from doing this every single day for years. You pinch, shape, and fold, gauging consistency like your mother once did, and her mother before her. Measurements here aren't about numbers, they're about feel, smell, and the occasional frustrated huff when something's gone mysteriously wrong. You reach for a palmful of ground coriander, then change your mind and toss in some dried date pulp instead. This particular batch is going to a priest who claims Hathor herself visits his dreams. Whether she does or not, he prefers his loaves sweet, and you suspect complaints will be submitted to the divine suggestion box if they're not just right. Next to you, someone's shaping their bread too tightly. It'll crack in the oven. You say nothing. Let the fire teach them. There are no instructions carved into the temple walls for this kind of craft. It's all passed hand to hand, usually with a grumbled, "not like that," and a slap on the wrist if you're lucky. A clay bowl wobbles dangerously close to the edge of a table. You catch it just in time, and your neighbor grins. "The gods are testing your reflexes," he jokes, wiping flour across his face and leaving a white smudge like war paint. You chuckle, but a part of you really does wonder sometimes. Strange things happen in the bakery. Batches rise too fast, bees appear from nowhere. Once, a perfectly shaped crocodile-shaped loaf split down the middle like someone had cursed it. No one talks about that day. You sprinkle a little desert salt into your bowl, watching the grains vanish into the dough. The salt's coarse, collected from dried-up ponds far to the south. It doesn't just flavor the bread, it keeps it from spoiling in the heat. Especially important if it's going to sit on a stone altar for a week, or get buried with someone for eternity. No pressure. A young apprentice sidles up to you with a jug of water. He hesitates, waiting for your nod before pouring. He's nervous, probably his first week. You offer a quiet, "well done," as he gets the mix just right. Encouragement isn't always handed out here, but you remember what it was like, when your hands shook and your loaves looked like collapsed mud huts. As you shape another round, you use your thumb to press a slight indent into the top, the traditional way to hold a drop of honey after baking. It's a subtle detail, but it'll earn a nod from the head baker if he notices. And if he doesn't, well, the gods will. The sun is climbing higher now. You squint as it filters through a break in the courtyard wall, casting golden stripes across your work table. A fly lands on your forearm, and you brush it away with the back of a flour-covered wrist. The heat is building, and your linen tunic sticks slightly to your back. Still, you work. The temple expects 300 loaves today, and you're already behind. Kneading, folding, shaping. Your muscles remember the motion like a dance. There's a comfort in it, a kind of trance. The world narrows to the bowl in front of you, the soft sound of dough stretching, and the crackling hiss from the fire. Someone starts humming. A silly tune. One of the old ones, something about a crocodile and a date thief. You hum along, off-key, but no one minds. You glance down at your hands, coated in flour and flecked with date pulp. These are baker's hands, strong, calloused, stained. You've burned yourself more than you can count. There's a scar on your forefinger where a pan slipped last summer, and another on your elbow from an overeager goat that somehow made it into the courtyard during festival week. Someone drops a clay bowl with a sharp crack. Heads turn. The apprentice from earlier stares down at the shards, frozen in place. No one says anything at first. Then the old baker sighs and starts sweeping it up with a palm frond, muttering something about terracotta being cursed anyway. The mood lifts quickly. Everyone's broken something, or someone, usually by accident. As you finish another batch, you set it aside to rest under a damp cloth.
You mark the bowl with a small smear of red ochre, your own code, so you'll know it's yours when it's time to bake. There are no name tags here, just color-coded streaks and the occasional poorly drawn bird for flair. You move on to shaping specialty loaves, ones meant to be molded. You fetch a clay form from the rack, this one shaped like a lotus bloom. The detail is incredible, each petal delicately carved. You press the dough into it gently, careful not to overfill. When you pull it out, the shape holds beautifully. It'll be perfect after baking. Crisp edges, soft middle, and a tiny glisten of honey on top. Divine, literally. Historians still argue whether these molds were standardized or if each temple had its own regional flair. Some say the priests insisted on uniformity. Others claim it depended entirely on the whims of whoever had the loudest voice and the cleanest sandals. One last loaf before the next stage.
The fire pit is already roaring when you approach it. The clay oven squats low and round like a beetle curled in on itself, its blackened mouth glowing red at the edges. You feel the heat hit your face before you're even halfway across the courtyard, and by the time you reach it, your cheeks are flushed, your palms already sweating. The head baker stands by the oven, poker in hand, poking at the embers with the bored expertise of someone who's done this about 10,000 times and still hasn't figured out a way to avoid the occasional eyebrow singe. He gives you a grunt of acknowledgement, a friendly grunt as far as those go, and steps aside to let you in. You crouch beside the fire, your basket of shaped doughs balanced on one hip. It's time to bake the honey breads. Some are for offering, some, quietly, for eating, and some are destined to be sealed in tombs, wrapped like little edible mummies and stuffed into storage chambers beside gold, amulets, and the occasional disapproving cat statue. Your first loaf goes in. You place it carefully on a hot stone slab with a strip of flat green reed underneath, your own trick to keep the bottom from burning. It gives the bread a faint grassy scent too, which nobody's complained about yet. As the loaf hits the heat, it sighs, and you can already see the honey bubbling up from that little thumb-shaped dip you pressed earlier. You keep going, working quickly. The oven is hungry, and if you hesitate, it'll burn your batch just to prove a point. Loaf after loaf slides in, and you shuffle them around in a practiced rhythm, back row for the denser doughs, front edge for the delicate lotus molds. The smell begins to rise, thick and sweet, toasted barley, wild honey, and a faint tang of dried fig. There's something almost meditative about this part. The fire, the heat, the quiet popping of tiny air pockets inside the dough. You lean back and let your eyes blur a little, just watching the steam curl upward into the sunlight. For a moment, you could swear the smoke looks like a cobra rising, elegant and slow, before it vanishes into the air. Historians still argue whether these ovens were used purely for temple offerings or if everyday households used similar techniques. Some claim that temple bakers held elite status, responsible for divine food. Others argue they were just the overworked catering team for the gods. Either way, the fire's hot and the hours are long. Someone behind you sneezes, and the head baker mutters something that sounds like a curse but might actually be a blessing. It's hard to tell with him. You glance back. Another apprentice is struggling with his batch, too dry, not enough honey, and already cracking before it hits the heat. You give him a small nod toward the water jar and point at the dough. No words needed. He gets it. The sun is higher now. Shadows have shrunk to tiny puddles clinging to the base of the walls. A line of ants trails along a cracked floor tile, completely unfazed by the heat or the humans. One carries a sugar grain that looks larger than its own head. You watch it for a moment, fascinated. It's working as hard as you are, maybe harder, and it doesn't even get a lunch break. Someone pulls a tray from the oven too early, and a half-baked loaf collapses on itself like a sad sandcastle. The head baker clicks his tongue. "Bread of Sobek, that one," he mutters. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it doesn't sound flattering. You make a mental note to let yours brown just a bit longer. As your first tray comes out, you breathe in deeply. The smell is exquisite. These aren't your average flatbreads. This is divine-grade carbohydrate craftsmanship. You tap one gently. It gives a perfect hollow thump.
The crust is golden, the top slightly sticky with melted honey, and just soft enough to yield when pressed. You line them up neatly on a reed mat to cool, taking a moment to admire them like a proud parent. They're slightly different shapes, no two ever come out quite the same, but they each have character. One is a bit lopsided, one rose higher on one side, one's got a thumbprint that definitely wasn't supposed to be there, but they'll do. An older baker passes by and pauses. "Nice batch," he grunts, then keeps walking. That's the highest compliment you've gotten all month. You pretend not to beam, but your chest feels a little warmer than the oven behind you. You wrap the cooled loaves in linen, the good kind, undyed, soft, and slightly frayed at the edges. Each is folded with care, like a gift, and in a way they are. These will be placed before statues of gods, beside bowls of beer and flowers, maybe even carried in ceremonial processions. Not bad for something made from flour, water, and heat. You pause to pop a broken piece into your mouth. It's still warm. The honey's subtle but clings to your tongue, and there's a whisper of something smoky from the fire. It's good, really good. You smile, chewing slowly, then glance around to make sure no one saw. The gods probably won't miss that one. Probably. As the baking shifts into high gear, the courtyard fills with activity. Loaves are coming out every few minutes.
The loaves are cooling now, their sweet scent hanging thick in the courtyard like honey itself has melted into the air. You stretch your back, muscles warm and aching in that oddly satisfying way they only do after a morning well spent baking for the divine. But you can't linger. The next part of the ritual has begun, and you're expected to prepare the presentation baskets. No half-hearted arrangements, not when you're dealing with offerings to the gods. You gather the loaves into shallow reed trays, lined with lotus petals and dried papyrus leaves. The petals are starting to curl at the edges, their color faded from the sun, but they still give off that faint watery scent, the smell of the Nile in late spring. It's subtle, but that's the point. The gods aren't easily impressed, but they do notice details. Each tray must be arranged just so. Larger loaves in the center, the smaller, more decorative ones placed in circles around them like petals around a flower. One misshapen piece gets quietly relocated to the back, tucked behind a fig cake. Not that the gods are vain, but, well, you wouldn't wear your frayed sandals to a royal banquet, would you? As you prepare the last tray, a shadow crosses the courtyard. You glance up. The priest of Hathor is coming down the steps, robes crisp, expression unreadable. You straighten, resisting the urge to brush flour off your tunic with your honey-sticky hands. He nods. Approval, possibly. He doesn't say much, but he lifts one of the loaves, tilts it toward the light, and makes a thoughtful sound. You wonder, not for the first time, whether he actually likes honey bread or if he's just pretending for the ritual. You once heard a rumor that he prefers date rolls. Scandalous. The priest murmurs something to his attendant, who hurries off. Moments later, a procession begins forming, slow, deliberate, and entirely too solemn for what's essentially a holy bakery delivery run. Still, you respect the theater of it all. The gods don't read receipts, they like a bit of ceremony. Historians still argue whether these offerings were meant to literally feed the gods or just symbolically appease them. Some believe the priests ate them later, redistributing them among the temple staff. Others claim they were left to dry and crumble as a gesture of sacred waste. Either way, your bread is going to be handled like treasure. You follow the procession through a shaded colonnade, the smell of burning myrrh growing stronger with every step. Columns tower above you, painted with stories of gods, kings, and scenes of daily life that look suspiciously like the bakery you just left. One carving shows a man holding a tray exactly like yours. You try not to smile. The inner temple is cool and quiet. You're not allowed past the second chamber, not unless you've completed the purification rites, which involve a lot of water, fasting, and probably more nudity than you're comfortable with. But from here, you can just barely see the altar where your bread will be placed. Golden plates, ivory-handled knives, and, yup, someone's definitely cutting pomegranate. You carefully place your baskets at the designated spot and step back, arms folded across your chest. The priest chants something melodic and unintelligible.
Then the attendant steps forward and begins rearranging your beautiful trays. You watch, mildly horrified, as he rotates your symmetrical arrangement by 45 degrees and swaps a perfectly golden loaf with one that looks like it was made by a sleepy child. Deep breaths. You leave before you say something regrettable. Back out in the sunlight, you rejoin the other bakers. One of them offers you a bite of something. Fig, wrapped in barley dough and dusted with crushed carob. You take it, chew thoughtfully. It's dry, could use more honey. You don't say anything, though. Temple courtesy. You return to the courtyard to start cleaning up. The oven's cooled, its mouth now yawning rather than roaring. You sweep ash from the stones, brush loose flour into a crack near the wall, and collect the used reeds for drying. Nothing is wasted. Well, nothing outside the offering trays, that is. Nearby, someone has started humming. A lazy tune, half song, half daydream. You catch yourself swaying to it, just a little, as you scrub a dough bowl clean. The scent of baking still clings to your hands, sweet and earthy. You pause and hold your fingers to your nose, smiling faintly. You smell like a very tired, slightly burnt god. A child runs through the courtyard, probably one of the junior apprentices sent to fetch more water. He slips on a patch of spilled barley and goes down with a dramatic thud. You wince. He pops back up, grinning, no damage done. You remember being that small and thinking that temple ovens were volcanoes. Honestly, you weren't that far off. Later, as the shadows stretch long across the walls and the workers begin to trickle out, you find a quiet spot in the shade. You sit down on a worn block of limestone, probably once part of something far grander. You stretch your legs.
You awaken to the soft patter of footsteps outside your chamber, a messenger bearing news from the granary. It's early, before the sun has fully kissed the horizon, but the temple never sleeps, and neither do you. Bread waits for no one. The messenger's news is simple. A shipment of new ingredients has arrived from Nubia. Fresh honey, wild date syrup, and a rare spice called coalseed, used sparingly for flavor and a touch of mystery. You're intrigued. Coalseed? You've only heard whispers in the marketplace about its exotic aroma and subtle sweetness. Incorporating it into your honey bread for the gods could add a new dimension, a whisper of distant lands folded into familiar tastes. With a deliberate calm, you prepare the dough, folding in the sweet Nubian honey and a hint of coalseed powder. The aroma that rises from the mixing bowl is subtle but distinct, earthy, floral, and slightly spicy. It feels like a secret invitation to a journey far beyond the temple walls. You work slowly, shaping each loaf with care. The dough is sticky, demanding patience and gentle hands. As you knead, you think about the networks that brought these ingredients here. The caravans crossing deserts, the riverboats navigating the Nile's bends, the bustling markets alive with trade and rumor. The temple kitchen is alive with quiet excitement. Bakers exchange curious glances and tentative tastes, wondering if this new flavor will be accepted by the gods, or more importantly, by the high priests who oversee offerings. Historians still debate how much foreign influence shaped ancient Egyptian cuisine. Some argue it was minimal, a cautious blending. Others believe Egypt's location made it a melting pot of tastes and techniques. You lean toward the latter. After all, your bread today is proof that distant lands find their way into even the most sacred rituals. As the loaves bake, the temple's choir begins their morning chant, a gentle hum that fills the vaulted halls, mixing with the scent of warm bread. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the gods listening, savoring each bite as much as the prayers. Later, during the ceremonial offering, you watch from the shadows as priests lift the honey-coal loaves, presenting them with solemn reverence. A hush falls over the crowd, broken only by the soft crackle of burning incense. You smile to yourself, knowing that your work has bridged worlds, uniting the ancient with the new, the sacred with the everyday. And as the day stretches on, you quietly anticipate the next batch, the next ingredient, the next story baked into dough and flame.
because that is the rhythm of your life. The next morning begins not with sunlight, but with the rhythmic splash of water against stone. You're up before dawn again, of course you are, and this time you're assigned to the grain storage rooms. Less glamorous than baking, sure, but essential. No flour, no bread. No bread, no offerings. No offerings, well, you get the idea. You shuffle into the granary with a yawn lodged somewhere deep in your throat. It's still cool inside, a little damp, and the faint scent of old wheat lingers in the air like a quiet argument. You greet the overseer with a nod. He's already tallying sacks of emmer, lips moving as he counts, brow furrowed like he's trying to remember if he already added sack 37. You decide not to interrupt. Your job today is to help inspect and weigh the grain, making sure the temple stores haven't been tampered with by rats, thieves, or overzealous birds. You grab a measuring scoop, plunge it into the emmer bin, and lift out a dusty cascade of wheat and chaff. It rustles softly, the sound oddly satisfying, like dry papyrus being crumpled in slow motion. As you work, your mind wanders. You think about how this grain started its life in some distant Nile-side field, probably near Thebes. Maybe a woman just like you, elbows deep in sun-warmed soil, helped harvest it, humming as she worked. Maybe she complained about sore shoulders and late rains, and how the new overseer was too fond of his own voice. Some things, you suspect, are universal. Historians still argue whether women were directly involved in temple grain distribution or if they mostly handled domestic storage. You're living proof that at least in some temples, women run the granary floor just as well as men, if not better. The head scribe certainly thinks so, though that might just be because you corrected his emmer to barley conversion rate last week. Politely, of course. The granary buzzes with quiet industry. Across the room, someone sneezes and a cloud of chaff rises like incense. Another worker fans herself with a broken reed basket lid. You hear a clatter and turn to see a boy, no more than 10, struggling to balance 2 amphorae of grain syrup. He's trying to walk like he's not afraid they'll break, which of course means he's seconds from disaster. You jog over and grab one amphora just as it starts to tilt. Crisis averted. He flashes you a gap-toothed smile. You return it with a wink. You're a bread maker, but today you're also an amphora saver. Titles are flexible. You pause to brush some stray grain dust from your arms, but it's a losing battle. It's everywhere, under your fingernails, in your sandals, probably in your ears. You've heard that high priests keep scented oils in their offices specifically for scrubbing off temple residue. Maybe you'll sneak in and borrow a dab of lotus oil later. You wouldn't be the first. The temple cat wanders in, as cats tend to do, looking entirely uninterested in anything involving actual work. She hops up onto a grain bin and curls into a crescent, one eye cracking open just enough to silently judge you. You nod at her. She doesn't nod back. Later, while moving sacks from the inner chamber to the milling area, you pass a pair of scribes arguing over an entry on the inventory tablet. One insists the last shipment was short 3 sacks. The other swears they were redirected to another shrine. You don't chime in, but you know the truth. One of the boats sank last week. Too full, not enough rope. You were there. The grain bloomed in the water like it was trying to become a floating field. A waste, sure, but also kind of beautiful. You think about that sometimes, how things that are meant to nourish, grain, bread, honey, can become offerings even when they don't reach the altar. Maybe the gods accept intention just as much as delivery. By midday, your arms are jelly, and your legs feel like wet papyrus strips. You take your break in a shady corner, sitting on an overturned bin. One of the junior workers offers you a handful of dried sycamore figs. You accept, popping one into your mouth and chewing slowly. Sweet, a little crunchy, possibly full of tiny beetles, but you're too tired to care. You chat lazily with the fig-offering apprentice. He tells you his uncle is a brewer downriver, and that their temple makes bread with leftover mash from the beer barrels. You pretend to be scandalized. Temple bread should be pure. But you're secretly intrigued. Beer bread? Sounds like a shortcut the gods might actually approve of. Historians still debate how much experimentation happened in temple bakeries. Were bakers allowed to improvise, or was every loaf bound by strict divine recipes passed down from dynastic decree? Based on the crumbly mess you saw last week made by the senior baker's apprentice, you'd wager improvisation was not only allowed, it was necessary. Because divine decree or not, sometimes your emmer flour is clumpy, and sometimes the honey delivery is late, and sometimes someone accidentally.
You wake up with a stiff neck and emmer dust in your hair, again. But the smell drifting in from the temple kitchens makes up for it. Warm grain, wood smoke, and the faintest hint of toasted honey. It's bread day. Not prep, not milling, not hauling. Today, you bake. You shuffle into the bakery with a half-hearted stretch. The sun has barely crawled above the horizon, but the ovens are already glowing. Flames lick gently at the soot-darkened clay, and the air has that almost magical warmth, like standing in the belly of a sleeping beast. The head baker gives you a sleepy nod, motioning to the freshly milled flour baskets. You nod back, a silent understanding between two people who spent way too much of their lives elbow-deep in dough. The first task is measuring out ingredients. You're making honey bread today, specifically a batch meant for the inner sanctum. It needs to be sweeter, softer, more perfect than anything eaten by mortals. Of course, perfection is subjective. Some gods, you're told, actually prefer a little crunch. But your instructions are clear. No burnt edges, and the honey needs to be the real stuff, not the sticky date syrup some people try to sneak in when no one's looking. You mix the flour, water, and honey in a wide, shallow basin. It sloshes and resists in all the usual ways. As you stir, you glance at the jar of added flavorings. A bit of crushed coriander, maybe some dates. One apprentice suggests a few lotus petals for fragrance. You shrug. Why not? The gods might enjoy a surprise once in a while. And if not, well, it won't be the first time you've been scolded for creativity in the kitchen. Historians still argue whether honey bread recipes varied significantly between temples or were standardized by priestly decree. Some argue the variations point to regional pride. Others think it was simply a matter of which insects happened to be nearby. You, personally, believe the answer is obvious. Whoever caught the most bees made the rules. You knead the dough slowly, pressing it with the heels of your hands, then folding it again and again until it starts to sigh beneath your touch. The process is meditative. Push, fold, turn. The bakery hums with quiet conversation and rhythmic thumps. Occasionally, someone hums. Occasionally, someone swears when a batch turns sticky. You feel a calm contentment settle over you, the kind that only comes from muscle memory and a warm workspace. A few paces away, the oven master checks the clay cones. These are no ordinary ovens. They're tall, beehive-shaped kilns, fed from the bottom and lined with stones. The baker slides a testing pebble across the hot inner surface and listens for the hiss. Too much hiss, and it's too hot. No hiss, and the bread will turn out dense and sad. Today, just right. You form the loaves with practiced care. These aren't your everyday triangle breads for workers. These are taller, molded into intricate shapes, twisted rings, delicate coils, and small, soft domes dusted with flour and kissed with honey. You press a carved seal onto the top of one, imprinting it with a stylized falcon. That one's going to Horus. You hope he appreciates the extra detail. He seems picky. Nearby, a young boy has gotten dough all over his face. He looks horrified, like the gods themselves might smite him for his clumsiness. You hand him a cloth and ruffle his hair. You're fine, you say. They like chaos. Look at Seth. The boy doesn't laugh, but the assistant baker behind him does, nearly dropping her tray of risen dough in the process. While waiting for the loaves to rise, you move to the glazing table. There, you stir honey with a little beer and a touch of oil, brushing it gently across the tops of the proofed breads. It catches the morning light, turning golden, almost divine. You wonder how many bees had to work for this moment. Hundreds? Thousands? Someone should write a hymn for the bees. The loaves go into the oven one by one.
Timing is everything. Too long, and the honey blackens. Too short, and the gods might assume you're being lazy. You monitor your batch like a hawk. No, like a temple cat. Alert, silent, judgmental. You peek in through the side vent and watch the top swell and crack just slightly, the honey bubbling at the edges. When the scent is at its peak, sweet, smoky, and a little nutty, you know it's time. You remove the loaves with care, each one lifted like a tiny treasure. They're cooling now, laid out on woven mats, the honey glaze glistening like sunlight on the Nile. One of the priests wanders in, smelling the air, looking smug. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. He always shows up around this time. Coincidence? Not a chance. Smells adequate, he says, poking one with the exaggerated caution of a man who's never lifted a flour sack in his life.
The midday heat swells like a tide over the temple grounds, pressing in from the walls, rising from the stones, clinging to every fold of linen. You're sweating in places you didn't know had pores, but you keep going. There's no room for idle hands here, not when the bread meant for mortal mouths still needs baking. The divine batch may be cooling in the offering room, but your real challenge is only beginning. Hundreds of temple workers, scribes, musicians, guards, gardeners, and even a few crocodile tenders will expect their rations soon. You glance at the tall clay jar labeled Emmer Coarse and sigh. Time to get gritty. You pour the rough ground grain into a wide bowl and notice immediately someone forgot to sift it. Again. You sigh a second time, this one louder, more theatrical. It's not that anyone notices, it just feels good. You grab a reed sifter and start shaking. Dust puffs into the air, tickling your nose and coating your arms in fine, ancient powder. You look like you've wrestled a ghost and lost. The grain makes a soft hiss as it falls into the mixing vat, like a tiny sandstorm. You add water slowly, stirring with a heavy wooden paddle until it forms a thick, sticky mass. This dough is different, rougher, less refined, destined not for gods, but for mouths that chew without complaint. Still, you find pride in the ritual. Every batch is a kind of hymn, a practical prayer, one that says, "We are fed, therefore we continue." While you mix, a lanky assistant named Jet stumbles in, arms full of fresh rush baskets. "Lunch rounds," he mumbles, already sweaty, already late. He's got a smear of red ochre across his forehead and one sandal on the wrong foot. You don't ask, it's not your business. As you portion the dough, you shape them into simple triangles, standard fare. Not too thick, not too soft, definitely not burnt. The oven master gestures impatiently. The cone ovens have cooled just enough for these rations. You move quickly, flipping loaves with practiced grace. You can't help but hum a little tune, something rhythmic, calming. A melody that's been stuck in your head since the last festival of Hathor, when dancers balanced jars of beer on their heads and a priestess told your fortune with cowrie shells. She'd said you'd live long, but not very excitingly. You'd laughed then. You're starting to think she was right. While the bread bakes, you scrape honey residue off the work table. It's dried and crusty golden streaks that cling stubbornly to the clay surface. As you work, a scribe pops in from the scroll chamber. He smells like ink and bad posture. "Did the offerings go out?" he asks without greeting. "They did," you reply, not looking up. He squints toward the cooling rack. "Those for the musicians?" "No," you say. "These are for people who remember to say hello." He grunts and disappears. Honestly, you could replace half the scribes with well-trained goats and nobody would notice. Back to the dough. You roll another batch and realize you're nearly out of beer for the starter. It's not real baking without beer after all, not the drinking kind, but the half-fermented, soupy brew that gives the bread its tang and life. You send Jet sprinting to the fermentation vats. He returns 20 minutes later, panting and holding a gourd of foamy liquid like it's treasure. You sniff. Smells right, like a barley storm hit a thundercloud. Perfect.
As you mix the starter into the next round of dough, you feel the texture shift, become livelier, more cooperative. This batch will be better. You'll keep some for yourself. Maybe sneak a bit of fig paste into one if no one's looking. Historians still debate whether this type of communal baking was a strictly temple-based ritual or whether ordinary households followed the same routines. Some argue that families in cities like Memphis or Thebes had their own domestic versions of sacred baking traditions. Others believe it was all centralized, controlled, counted again. You suspect it was a bit of both. After all, you've seen people give offerings of a single, lovingly shaped loaf on altars made of rocks. Faith doesn't always need paperwork. Someone brings in an armful of tamarisk wood. You thank them, and the oven flares again. The next batch of bread goes in, and the scent this time is almost fruity, the beer mingling with the grain in the warm heart of the kiln. It smells generous, like the kind of bread you'd want to tear in half and share with someone who's had a long day hauling bricks or wrestling sacred cats. You remember your mother baking with her sisters long before you joined the temple kitchens. She used to tuck little seeds into the dough, fenugreek, coriander, sometimes a hidden olive if the season allowed. She called it surprise bread and made you guess what was inside before biting. You think about that now as you flick a sesame seed onto one of your personal loaves, smiling like a thief with a secret. The bread comes out steaming, split at the edges. The air has started to shift. A subtle breeze lifts through the narrow stone corridors, swirling scents of fresh bread, sweat, and lingering incense. You tilt your head and breathe it in. It's a strange blend, but oddly comforting. It means the temple is alive, and for now, fed. With the divine and mortal bread duties handled, you finally have a chance to catch your breath. But not for long. One of the assistant priests appears at the doorway, his shaved head shining like a polished date stone. He clears his throat, as if that might soften what's coming next. "They need you in the sacred storeroom," he says, already backing away like you're a lion in a bad mood. You know the drill. There's an audit coming up, and nothing makes the high priest more nervous than the thought of stale honey cakes on festival day. So, with a theatrical groan, you rise and make your way across the temple complex, winding through courtyards and columns until you reach the small sealed chamber behind the offering room. The air here is heavy with preservation. You step inside, and it's like entering another world. Clay jars of dates, honey, and flour are lined up like soldiers. Shelves groan under stacks of dried loaves, round and ridged, some shaped like lotus flowers or little animals. Most are wrapped tightly in linen, their smell muted, their edges hardened over time. You start your inspection. Each offering loaf must be cataloged, rotated, sometimes even polished with a dab of oil to restore its luster. A bit ridiculous, perhaps, but then again, if the gods are going to gaze upon these gifts for eternity, they might as well look decent. You lift a particularly ancient-looking loaf and tap it gently. It sounds like knocking on the side of a tomb. You chuckle. "Still more appetizing than Jet's breakfast attempts," you mutter, jotting down a mark in the tally scroll. As you work, you notice something strange. One of the sealed jars in the corner seems off. It's marked for date syrup, but the weight is all wrong. Curious, you pry open the lid and discover a thick, grainy substance that smells faintly of carob and herbs. You take a cautious sniff. Not date syrup, not even close. You've heard of this before. A lost recipe called necheret paste, a sacred foodstuff sometimes substituted for honey in times of scarcity. Historians today still argue whether necheret was a real routine staple or more of an emergency filler for less affluent temples. Some scrolls mention it, others don't. But here it is, solid and sticky and clearly forgotten. You grin. A little culinary archaeology never hurt anyone. You set the jar aside carefully, making a note to report it, after maybe sampling a bit yourself. For research, obviously. Back to the shelves. You dust off a tray of pastries shaped like little eyes, the Wadjet symbol. These were for funerary rituals, you remember, placed in tombs to guide the soul safely to the afterlife. You admire the precision of the shapes, the way the bakers curved the lids just so, the pupils slightly off-center to mimic divine vision. You take mental notes. Maybe tomorrow you'll try recreating them. Not for death, of course, just for fun. Maybe add fig paste or chopped nuts. Temple workers would love that. You imagine Jet trying to eat his without knowing what it represents and laugh softly to yourself. Suddenly, a scuffle from the hallway draws your attention. A group of wide-eyed initiates rush past, muttering about a goat that got into the priest's linen closet. You shake your head. Every day, something. Still, you welcome the break in silence. It gives you time to finish sorting the final baskets. You brush off crumbs, smooth the linen, reknot the rush twine, and step back to admire the room. Everything gleams. Everything smells just right. There's a certain pride in tidiness, in knowing you've prepared not only for mouths, but for eternity. Your stomach growls again, naturally. All this talk of fig pastries and honey paste, and you haven't eaten a proper meal yet. As you step outside, a cooler breeze surprises you. The sun's dipped behind the pylons, and long shadows stretch across the temple floor. It's almost evening. At this hour, the kitchen takes on a different rhythm. No longer frantic, but slow, purposeful. The last breads of the day are more indulgent, sweetened with dates, shaped like crescents, sometimes adorned with sesame or tiny etchings of animals, eyes, or waves. These are the loaves of Festival Eve, of quiet conversations and humming while you work. You start prepping your station again, this time with care. You've got a little stash of poppy seeds, rare, treasured, and totally unapproved for this batch. But who's checking? Besides, if a god tasted these, they'd thank you. Your fingers move automatically, forming the dough, stretching it, pinching the edges. You work by feel now. No measurements, no scrolls. Just memory and instinct and that soft rhythm of breath and movement. You let your thoughts.
The evening sky over the temple complex shifts to deep ochre, with hints of indigo pooling between columns. You're still dusted in flour, but there's a serenity in the way the light glows off the sandstone walls. This time of day, the kitchen exhales. The fire slows. The noise fades. Even the gods, you imagine, might be napping by now. You gather the cooling loaves with practiced care. Some will be placed directly on altars tonight. Others will be wrapped in linen and ferried quietly into tombs, bundled in baskets with lotus petals and dried fish so the dead may never hunger. The idea that someone could still be nibbling your bread 3,000 years from now is oddly flattering. Tonight, though, there's a special request waiting for you. A priest approaches, holding an ivory tablet inscribed with a festival menu. You glance over the list. Honey bread, barley cakes, almond tarts, something vaguely translated as Nekhbet's feather loaf, likely symbolic and probably impossible to shape without losing your temper. Oh, and it's for tomorrow's dawn offering, the priest adds breezily, already backing away. You resist the urge to fling a date pit at him. Back to the grind. You roll up your sleeves, still streaked with yesterday's lotus glaze, and begin assembling the ingredients. There's a different kind of energy in the air during festival preparations. It's not the usual urgency of feeding the priests or appeasing the gods. It's anticipation. The scent of spices in clay pots, the clink of copper bowls, the quiet excitement of doing something beautiful. As you mix the batter for the honey bread, you let your thoughts drift again. The history of these offerings stretches deep into the past, older even than the pyramids, older than some gods. Historians still argue whether honey bread began as a strictly religious item or whether it had humbler origins, evolving from peasant celebrations to divine rituals. One theory says early offerings used wild honey and millet, baked under hot stones and left in river shrines, offerings to unknown spirits. But tonight, you're making the modern version, if anything in ancient Egypt can be called modern. It involves semolina flour, mashed dates, a hint of coriander, and, of course, honey. You drizzle it slowly from a thick ceramic jar, watching it ribbon into the dough like golden silk. The kitchen fills with its scent, rich, deep, and comforting. You're reminded of something your grandmother used to say while baking.
If the bees stop visiting your bread, the gods might follow. She meant it literally, and honestly, you kind of believe it. As you knead the dough, your hands sticky with sweet paste, you glance over at the other bakers. Jet is humming tunelessly, his dough somehow all over his sleeves. A young apprentice tries to shape a falcon loaf and ends up with something that looks more like a bloated duck. You're tempted to tease him, but the look of quiet frustration on his face holds you back. Instead, you wander over and gently show him how to press the dough into the carved mold, how to tuck the wings in with just the right amount of pressure. There, you say, handing him the corrected loaf. Still slightly cursed looking, but better. He laughs, and you can see the tension lift from his shoulders. While the breads bake, you head to the herb rack. For festival loaves, you like to add subtle flavors: thyme, fenugreek, even a trace of cinnamon when you can get it. You choose a few crushed petals of blue lotus, just for color, and sprinkle them onto the tops of the shaped loaves. Whether the gods actually care or not isn't really the point. The ritual of it matters, the intention matters, and to you, the beauty most. Nearby, a senior priest chants softly, preparing the offering trays. His voice, low and steady, mingles with the crackle of the oven's fire. It's a melody you've heard since childhood, a melody that, weirdly enough, you sometimes hum in your sleep. As the night deepens, a stillness settles over the kitchen. One by one, the loaves are removed, placed onto cooling mats of woven reed. You test one carefully. Warm, golden, sweet with honey, and just the faintest crisp from the fire-licked edge. Perfect. You wrap the best loaves in fine linen, a delicate job usually given to someone with steady fingers and a reverence for detail. Tonight, that's you. You fold the fabric over each one like a baby, tuck in the edges, bind them with a papyrus ribbon dyed blue. They're not just food anymore, they're prayers in starch and sugar. And now, the final part of the ritual. Yeah, not officially sanctioned, of course, but come on, you didn't spend 3 hours hand-shaping wadjet eyes and feather loaves just to watch them disappear into a temple altar. You break off a warm piece and pop it into your mouth. The flavor is astonishing, deeply sweet, slightly grainy, a whisper of spice. You lean back against the cool stone wall and let the taste linger, eyes half closed.
You're wiping your hands on a linen cloth, the sweetness of honey still clinging to your fingers when the temple bells sound. Not the sharp clang of alarm, no. This is the low, humming toll that means preparation. Festival morning is coming. Slowly, ceremonially, like sunrise behind the pylons. You don't rush. That's the secret here. Nothing is rushed. Even exhaustion takes its time in ancient Egypt. As the other bakers bustle to clean the work tables and stoke the ovens for one last bake, you wander out into the side courtyard, away from the flour dust and steaming pots. The breeze carries the scent of marjoram and cooling sandstone. And far off you hear music, a sistrum rhythm, tinny and hypnotic, played by novices rehearsing for dawn. You lean against a column, half sitting on its cool stone base, and watch the last sliver of moon hang over the Nile. Down there, boats are tied loosely, their sails bundled like sleeping birds. You imagine the festival goers curled in their beds, dreaming of sweet cakes and bright offerings and painted processions. Up here, you're still working. A younger baker, barely 15, with flour dusting his eyebrows, emerges from the kitchen carrying 2 small trays. He sits beside you and offers one without a word. It's a test batch, by the look of it, tiny honey loaves shaped like palm fronds. You take a bite, a little dry. You forgot to soak the dates first, you say gently, and he sighs. Next time, he replies, and you smile. The two of you sit for a while in silence, watching a beetle scuttle by with single-minded purpose. A small, sacred scarab. Maybe a sign, or maybe just a hungry bug. Historians still argue whether ordinary insects like this held real symbolic value in daily temple life, or if that's just modern overreading. You personally think, why not both? Soon, your name is called. Time to return to duty.
Inside the inner kitchen, preparations for the ceremonial delivery are already underway. The highest quality breads are being carefully arranged on carved wooden trays. Each is adorned with tokens, lotus petals, strands of linen, bits of gold-leafed herbs. One of your colleagues is carving hieroglyphs into a cake using a reed stylus dipped in date syrup. You peer over her shoulder. The symbols read something like, "Given in sweetness, received in peace." A little poetic, a little vague. Perfect. The temple steward arrives with his usual drama, robes swishing like sails and the faint scent of cedar trailing behind him. He does the ritual quality check. One sniff, one skeptical poke, and one unnecessarily theatrical, You pass, of course. With that, the trays are lifted, slowly and reverently, and carried toward the sanctum. You don't follow. Your work is done, for now. The sacred delivery is for priests and high attendants. You, meanwhile, turn your attention to the real reward, leftovers. Because here's the thing about temple baking. After every grand feast, every divine nibble, there's always a little something left behind. A crust too crispy, a cake too lopsided for the altar, or just enough extra dough to make a mistake loaf or two. You and the other bakers gather these edible errors and sit in the rear corridor, passing them around like school children sneaking snacks. Someone brings out a little jar of fig paste, and for a moment, it's not divine worship or sacred duty. It's just people, tired and content, eating too much before sunrise. Someone mentions a rumor about a new bread mold being imported from the Levant, shaped like a fish, supposedly lucky. Another baker mutters that they once saw a high priest eat offering bread straight off the altar during a blackout. Everyone gasps in mock outrage. Stories like these carry weight. They're not written in scrolls or etched in stone, but they last. They get passed on with the recipes, baked into the very idea of bread itself. And you start thinking, maybe, one day, someone will dig up one of your loaves. Maybe it'll be perfectly preserved in some sealed storeroom, still bearing the faint print of your thumb in the dough. Maybe a modern scholar will analyze it, taste a recreated version, and wonder what kind of life you lived. Or maybe it'll just be a stale loaf, and that's fine too. The oven's cool. The last trays are emptied. You carry the leftover honey cakes into the courtyard and lay them out for the temple workers who kept the lamps lit all night. They thank you with sleepy nods and crumb-filled smiles. One of them says, "You could feed the gods and ghosts, but I'm just glad you fed me." You bow dramatically. All are welcome at my sacred table. Just don't touch the poppy seed stash. And then, finally, after what feels like several lifetimes, you make your way back to your little stone chamber tucked behind the herb garden. It smells like
You're back on your feet before the sun even peeks over the Nile. Again. Your body protests, knees stiff, hands raw, your spine doing that thing where it sounds like someone cracking papyrus scrolls. But there's bread to make. And more than that, there's something comforting about the rhythm of it all. You step outside and inhale the dawn air. Cool, damp, smelling faintly of wet stone, baked dust, and a faint trace of roasting lentils from the temple kitchens nearby. The city is quiet, save for the croak of distant ibis and the occasional clatter of carts bringing in fresh barley. It's the day after the festival, which means two things. One, your work's only halfway done, and two, the temple stores need restocking. That's right, nothing says sacred continuity like reorganizing hundreds of clay jars filled with flour, oil, and honey under the withering gaze of a stern inventory priest who thinks every baker is secretly stealing sesame. You trudge into the storeroom, dodging amphora and strategically placed scorpions. Okay, maybe not strategically placed, but somehow they always know exactly where your foot's about to land. Inside, you find the stockpile half-emptied from last night's offerings. Shelves lean under the weight of dates, cumin, ginger, and a brand new shipment of emmer wheat, its grains still clinging to husk. There's something almost magical about the hush of this room, like every ingredient is waiting patiently for its turn to become divine.
Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian storerooms were organized by strict priestly record-keeping or by good old-fashioned chaos and guesswork. Based on your current view, a half-unrolled inventory scroll, a spilled jar of anise, and a suspicious goat nibbling a linen sack, you're inclined toward chaos. Still, you make do. You and a few other bakers spend the morning grinding the new emmer grain by hand, working the saddle corns with methodical slowness. The powdery flour clouds the air like fog, coating your arms, your lashes, your thoughts. There's no rush. This isn't festival baking. This is for the daily loaves, the ones offered to household gods, slipped into tombs, and given to the temple workers. The kind of bread no one writes about, but that everyone eats. As you grind, you chat idly with the others. Complaints about sore shoulders, gossip about who dropped a tray of pigeon pies, theories about whether cats in the temple are secretly divine messengers or just extremely judgmental freeloaders. There's a whisper among the apprentices about a new bakery opening near the necropolis. Some guys claiming to have invented a triangular bread that channels the power of the pyramids. You snort. Next, they'll be selling amulets to keep your bread from burning. Someone mutters, "Too late, I bought one." You don't ask if it worked. By midday, the sun blazes high, and you head back to the main baking room to prepare lunch loaves. These aren't fancy festival breads, but they have their charm. Barley buns with fennel seeds, flatbreads with sprigs of garlic leaf pressed into the surface, and your personal favorite, date cakes wrapped in fig leaves, tied with twine like little edible secrets. You take your time shaping each one, smoothing cracks with damp fingers, humming under your breath. A few loaves go a little lopsided. That's fine. Not every offering needs to be perfect. The gods appreciate effort. And if they don't, well, maybe perfection's overrated anyway. Out in the sun-drenched courtyard, temple workers gather on woven mats, awaiting their share. A runner brings word that one of the high priestesses, Tomiat, you think, is requesting a dozen small loaves for a personal ritual. You nod, already pulling out your favorite mold, the one shaped like a water lily, and start assembling the ingredients. These ones need extra care. The priestess has a reputation for noticing everything. She once sent back a batch of lentil cakes because the edges were too melancholy. You don't even know what that means. As you knead and shape, a passing thought drifts in. How many bakers have stood in this same spot, making the same dough centuries apart? You wonder if their hands moved like yours do. If they also mumbled jokes to the flour? If they, too, stole a taste when no one was looking? Probably. That's the thing about baking in ancient Egypt. It's less about innovation and more about continuity. Bread as a quiet defiance against time. You bake, you shape, you feed the gods and the living alike. And then you do it again. Later, as the sun tips toward the western desert, you load the last loaves onto trays. A young delivery boy rushes in to collect the priestess's order, nearly tripping over his own sandals. You steady him with one hand and offer a final warning. Tell her the melancholy is intentional this time. He blinks. Is that good? You shrug. We'll find out. He dashes off, and you return to the table, brushing flour from your sleeves. You're tired, sure, but there's a kind of quiet joy in it too. You've done your part, again.
The evening draws in, soft and slow, wrapping the temple in a warm amber glow. You pause by the open window, watching the Nile's surface ripple gently beneath a sky smeared with pinks and purples. Somewhere nearby, a cat pads silently along the sandstone floor, a shadow slipping between flickering oil lamps. Your thoughts drift to the humble ingredients that have carried you through the day: emmer wheat, honey, dates, and a pinch of salt mined from the eastern deserts. These simple things, transformed by heat and hands into sustenance, ritual, and sometimes even art. Tonight, your focus turns to the lesser-known breads, the ones made not for the gods, but for the temple workers themselves. The bakers, scribes, and laborers who keep the wheels turning behind the scenes. Their bread is often overlooked, but to you, it holds a quiet dignity. You gather the dough for the workers' loaves,
coarse barley mixed with bits of fig and sesame seeds pressed lightly on top. You remember an odd little fact you once read. Some ancient Egyptians believed eating sesame bread could protect the eater from evil spirits lurking in the desert night. Whether true or superstition, it makes you smile as you shape each loaf. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or limited to specific regions and periods, but the idea that bread could be both food and shield feels just right. It reminds you that even the smallest loaf carries layers of meaning. As the loaves bake slowly in the cooling oven, you prepare a simple, soothing tea from dried hibiscus petals gathered earlier. The sharp crimson color is almost startling against the fading light, but the taste is calming, floral with a whisper of tartness. You sip slowly, savoring the moment. Outside, the temple's musicians begin their evening chants, low and rhythmic, blending with the distant call of a night bird. It's a sound that makes your eyelids grow heavy and your thoughts quiet. In this stillness, you reflect on the daily rituals of the bakers who came before you. The silent prayers whispered over dough, the careful measurements passed down through generations, the secret techniques tucked into worn hands. You reach for a small cracked jar of lotus perfume, an ingredient occasionally added to bread for special occasions. The scent is faint but intoxicating, a delicate reminder of the Nile's blooming flowers. You rub a bit between your fingers, inhaling deeply. There's a legend that pharaohs favored lotus-scented bread to bring dreams of the afterlife. Whether true or just a romantic tale is another scholarly debate that lingers like a soft mist over history. Your mind wanders to the workers who shared these breads, the women who gathered honey from wild hives, the men who tended the ovens through cold nights. Each one part of a vast, interwoven story told through flour and fire. As the last of the bread cools on woven mats, you wrap the loaves carefully in linen cloth. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new challenges, but for now, the temple rests, cradled by the night. You lean back against the stone wall, letting the music and the cool air lull you toward sleep. Remember that you are part of a long, unbroken chain, a baker not just of bread, but of history, memory, and quiet moments like this.
The afternoon sun filters lazily through the lattice windows, casting geometric shadows over the temple courtyard. Your hands are steady now, moving with practiced ease as you prepare a special batch of bread for the upcoming funerary rites. This bread won't just nourish bodies, it's meant to feed souls on their journey to the afterlife. You mix emmer flour with a touch of spiced honey, adding a rare ingredient today, ground blue lotus petals. Their powder lends a faintly sweet aroma and a soft blue tint to the dough, reminding you of the Nile's calm waters at dawn. Blue lotus was revered for its supposed calming and spiritual properties, believed to ease the transition between worlds. You think about the artisans who once decorated tomb walls with scenes of feasts and offerings, their brushstrokes immortalizing the connection between the living and the dead. The bread you bake is part of that legacy, a humble, fragrant link between two realms. Historians still debate whether these offerings were more symbolic than practical, or if they truly believed the dead would consume the bread in some mystical way. Regardless, the rituals surrounding funerary bread are steeped in reverence and careful tradition. As you shape the dough into small, intricate loaves, you remember an amusing tale about a baker who once tried to sneak a bit of extra honey into an offering, only to be caught when a priestess declared the bread too joyful for the mourners. It's a gentle reminder that even in sacred rites, there's room for humor and human error. The oven's warmth fills the room, and you hum softly, thinking about the scents that have defined your days. The earthy tang of grain, the floral sweetness of honey, the subtle spice of coal seed, and now the delicate fragrance of blue lotus. Outside, temple musicians begin a soft melody, their flutes and lyres weaving a soothing tapestry of sound.
You imagine the deceased spirit journeying peacefully, comforted by these scents and sounds, a serene passage through shadowed realms. As the bread bakes, you sit quietly, letting the calm wash over you. This bread is more than food. It's a story, a prayer, a bridge. When the loaves are ready, you carefully wrap them in linen, ready to be placed on the altar alongside incense and flowers. You feel a quiet pride, knowing that your hands have contributed to something timeless. And with that thought, the temple settles into evening calm, the air thick with history, honey, and whispered hopes.
The night deepens, and the temple grows still. Shadows lengthen, flickering softly in the glow of oil lamps. You sit by the oven, the warmth seeping into your bones, as you reflect on the day's labor, the rhythm of mixing, kneading, and baking that connects you to generations past. There's a gentle satisfaction in knowing that the humble honey bread you've crafted will nourish not only bodies but spirits, weaving together the mundane and the divine in a quiet ceremony of sustenance. As you tidy your tools and brush flour from the worn wooden table, your thoughts drift to the countless bakers whose hands shaped dough in this very place. Some lost to time, others whispered in ancient texts. Their stories mingled with yours, a timeless thread binding past and present. Outside, the temple's night watch begins their rounds, their footsteps soft against the cool stone. Somewhere nearby, the distant croak of a frog blends with the rustle of palm fronds in the evening breeze, a lullaby of the Nile itself. You lean back, eyes heavy but mind calm, feeling the steady pulse of history beneath your skin. This is more than baking. It's a ritual, a meditation, a way of honoring life and death with simple, sacred acts. Before you drift off, you recall the odd little quirks, like the belief that bread scented with lotus could bring prophetic dreams, or that sesame seeds warded off evil spirits. Whether myth or truth, these tales add flavor to your work, reminding you that every loaf carries a story waiting to be told. Now, as the temple sleeps, you rest too, wrapped in the quiet glow of centuries, cradled by the soft, enduring hum of the past. Wind down. Slow your breathing as you listen to the gentle sounds of the ancient world settling into night. Feel the weight of the day melt away like flour slipping through fingers, soft and light. Imagine the warm scent of honey bread fading into a peaceful breeze, carrying you across the Nile's tranquil waters. You are safe here, in this quiet moment, this timeless space. Let your mind drift, free and gentle, as the temple's lamps dim one by one. Rest now, knowing you have walked a path woven with care, history, and calm. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again over the sands, bringing new stories and new loaves. But for now, just breathe, relax, and let sleep find you softly. Sweet dreams.